Without further delay, I am thrilled to present Hollis. Hollis is a senior Hidden Sparks external coach, a mentor to new internal coaches, and a regional meeting facilitator. She has been empowering complex learners for 30 years as a learning specialist, special educator, and consultant in public, private, and charter. Hollis created Transform Boundaries, an organization dedicated to helping schools create programs and creative solutions to reach complex learners. She served as Director of Academic Intervention at Explore Charter School and co-created the Carmel Alternative High School for at-risk teens. Hollis also worked as a learning specialist at the Student Success Center of All Kinds of Minds. It is Hollis's passion to understand the unique cognitive underpinnings of each learner's triumphs and challenges to create more targeted interventions and solutions to facilitate joyful learning and student success. She was recently published in Jewish Educational Leadership Journal and Education Update. Oh, Hollis, this is Sarah. Full disclosure for the group, please, if you have your slides that I emailed out, turn them upside down so you are not looking at them now. Everyone, please do that. Okay. Great. Eitan, you can slide the controls over to Hollis now. Hollis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and welcome to everybody. I'm very happy to be here. What you'll see now on your screen, and I didn't realize you were sent to this ahead of time, so it might not work, are some riddles. And so if you haven't already seen the answers, please take a moment of silence to type in what you think the answers are to the riddles, and also take notice of how you feel as you're doing the process. So we're going to have a minute of silence. And you can type your answers into the chat box. So we have one brave person who's put a guess into the chat box. I'm going to stop your process. Hopefully you've taken note of how you felt. If you didn't put an answer in, I'm assuming, now I'm getting some answers. So we're going to get to the answers in a moment. Some of you got the correct answer. So before we get to the answers, what I'd like you to do is, if you felt like you were willing to put effort into it and enjoyed the mystery and challenging of your mind, you can put a check with the green check. If, on the other hand, you felt it was too challenging and you gave up pretty quickly, you can put an X so I can see what people were experiencing. Okay, so it's about even. There's a lot of checks and a lot of X's. So before we move on, I'm going to show you what the answers are, because I know everybody's often can't think and learn before they get the answers. So for the first one, you need to flip the numbers upside down and rotate them 180 degrees in one direction. And when you do that, you get a different series of numbers. You get 86, a blank, 88, 89, 90, 91. Then it's not so hard to do the riddle because you know that it's 87 that fits into that. Of course, you know, how do we know that we were supposed to flip it around? Well, we don't. That's why it's a riddle. The answer to number 2 is X, and many people got that answer because it's the 24th letter of the alphabet, and 2 X's is the same as the Roman numeral for 20. So we'll get back to the reason that I asked you to do that activity in a few minutes, but first, I want to give you an overview of the webinar. Today we're going to be talking about 3 essential traits that have been found to be vital for school and life success. By the end of this webinar, you will be able to identify these 3 traits and understand the research behind them. In addition, you will learn strategies that you can use in your classroom to foster these 3 traits. So the first essential trait is grit. Angela Duckworth out of the University of Pennsylvania is the scientist who has focused her research on grit. She defines grit as perseverance and passion for long-term goals. Although this definition discusses long-term goals, you also have to have grit in order to work through short-term challenges to get to those long-term goals. Those of you that clicked on the green checkbox demonstrated grit to complete a challenging task. Those of you that clicked on the X may want to work on your grit. Why? Because grit and perseverance are the best predictors of success in school and in life. How do we know this? Well, Dr. Duckworth sampled a large group of people by providing them with a questionnaire that identifies how gritty you are. And she did this with a large sample of people, including investment bankers, painters, journalists, people in academia, in medicine, in law, as well as graduates of West Point and spelling bee champions. She found that people with similar IQs at the same age level but with more grit achieved higher levels of success than those with self-reported lower levels. So now that you know grit is a key to success, what can we do as teachers to help develop that in our students? One way to do that is to help students understand and create SMART goals for themselves, and also to use SMART goals when you're creating lessons. So what is a SMART goal? Well, the S stands for specific. Can your goal be broken into smaller steps? M is for measurable. Can your goal be measured for progress? A is attainable. Can you physically achieve that goal? Do you have the means necessary? R is realistic. Don't create a goal that will discourage you from completing it. And T, timely. Does your goal have a start date and an end date? So here are some examples. If you look at the goal, I will learn the times tables in 3rd grade. Well, that might be true, but is it measurable? Does it have a time to it? Is it achievable? Well, it's kind of a general statement because we don't know what time frame are you talking about in this lesson, by winter break, by the end of the year. So a SMART goal would look more like this. By the end of 3rd grade, I will be able to recite the times tables up to 12 automatically. Very specific, it's measurable, and it's timely. You put a time on it. Another example is I will learn to count. That's not very, it's very general, it's not specific, it doesn't have the criteria of a SMART goal. A SMART goal would be I will learn to count to 100 by the end of kindergarten. It's specific, it's measurable, you know when it's supposed to happen. So now it's your turn. Take this goal and turn it into a SMART goal. And you can type your SMART goal into the chat box. Students will learn about the Revolutionary War. Is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it attainable? Is it realistic? Is it timely? If it doesn't meet all that criteria, add those pieces to it, and let's see what you can come up with. So here we go. Okay, so here's one. By the end of this unit, students will learn the causes and effects. I lost it. The causes of the. It keeps jumping as everybody puts a new one in. And 5 major events and 3 results of the war. That's very specific. It tells when it's going to happen. Students will know the causes of the Revolutionary War by the end of this week. students will be able to relate causes of the Revolutionary War. And I would just add a time frame to that, by the end of this lesson, by the end of the unit. So you get the idea. It looks like many of you are familiar with making a goal a SMART goal. Fantastic. So many people think that this is, when you're talking about SMART goals, that you're talking about working just with older students. But here's an example of an I CAN chart, which is kind of like a SMART goal chart for younger students, and you can do it as young as preschool. It's a way to help students work toward long-term goals, and the long-term goal here is to count by 100 by the end of the school year. As you can see on the left side are the names of the students going down, and then how they can count going across by each month. So each month the student counts, and the highest number they get to is written on the chart. This way they can see their progress toward their long-term goal and learn that it takes persistence and practice to meet their goal. Notice that some students had already met this goal when they started the year in September. So for those students, you would give them a different goal and perhaps either give them an individual I CAN chart, or if you have a group of students that are starting the year at a higher level, they can have an I CAN chart for their goal. So it's a way to differentiate instruction and have every student in your class see the benefit of working towards a long-term goal. Here's a chart for reading, also for younger children, on the number of sight words that they can read each month, and the goal is 100 by the end of the year. It's the same idea. For older students, you may break up a longer research project into short-term goals that can be achieved each month that build to a long-term goal, the research paper, the research project. But by having short, achievable pieces in the middle of the process, emphasizing the process is what's important here. So that the student knows that their effort and their persistence gets them to their long-term goal. So SMART goals are a way to build grit in the classroom. Another way is to focus on the process of working toward a goal rather than the product or the outcome. You can provide grades for the students' planning of the project, how they work together as a group, the process of building or putting together the project, and finally their presentation. The key is making the grades for each step worth the same weight, demonstrating the importance of persevering at each stage to complete a long-term goal and not just giving a grade at the end for the product. One example of this that I experienced was I was teaching middle and high school students, and there we were learning biology in the cells, and they put together a cell using a cake, frosting, and candy. And then they had to work with their group to present it and point out what each piece of candy represented and what that part of the cell did. And they were graded, they had a rubric, and they were graded not just on the actual presentation and accuracy and all that, but also how they worked together as a group and how they, the process of how they got there. And it was very successful. Another way to build grit in students is to point out where they already are demonstrating grit, such as the writing process, which is a long-step process to get to your published piece, and also in extracurricular activities. I think that we don't take that into account so much, but it's important for students to know, especially students who might struggle in school, that they already are exhibiting grit in learning a musical instrument or a sport, because that takes a lot of practice and perseverance. So if they can recognize that they're already exhibiting that in something that they're passionate about, they can bring that same trait into their schoolwork. A great writing program that builds in this idea is called SRSD, which stands for Self-Regulated Strategy Development, and the website that's in front of you is their website, where they have a great component of self-regulation and self-talk. You can go to their website and further information and also for free resources. And in a nutshell, they not only provide great mnemonics for remembering how to structure different genres of essays, but also include a piece on how to talk to yourself through a challenging task during the writing process. We know writing is something that a lot of kids give up on pretty easily, or they don't even start because it's so frustrating for them or it seems so insurmountable. So this program allows you to actually teach the kids how to talk themselves through those challenging times. Here's an example of one of their self-talk planners, and it provides, it has them think about an activity that they're really good at, and then what have they said to themselves when they were doing that activity. So let's say we're talking about gymnastics. You know, when they were trying to get a move down and they kept falling and they couldn't get it, what did they say to themselves? Did they quit? Did they give up? Did they say this is too hard? No, because now they can do that particular move. So what did they say to themselves? So they brainstorm a list of things that they can say to themselves. And then can they now apply that to their writing process? What can they say to themselves when they get stuck in writing that's similar to what they could say to themselves during an extracurricular activity that they really liked? And then another example from the program is this self-regulation planner that can become part of the writing process. And it doesn't matter what program you're using for writing or how you're doing your writing, you can integrate these things. And I certainly I'm not connected with this company and I don't make any money from this company. I just think it's a great free resource and a great program for helping kids develop grit around the writing process. And this includes sections about what you do before writing, during writing, and after writing. And for those kids who sit there for the whole period and you see them at the end and you didn't realize they only wrote 3 words after 45 minutes, it might be really helpful for them to have, this checklist of what they can do before, during, and after writing and ways to talk themselves through it. There's also a great project called the Curriculum Walk that a teacher did with her 5th grade students where they had to interview someone who had demonstrated grit in their life and then do a presentation on that person. It's kind of like walking in their shoes. And Sarah's going to send you a link to the video because there's a great video that shows the process that this teacher and these students went through, and it might be something you might want to implement in your classroom. So that's going to be an extra bonus after the webinar. So now we're moving from the essential trait of grit to mindset. The growth mindset. As I read the descriptions of each mindset, you're going to either click on the green check if you relate more to the green head, the growth mindset, or click on the red X if you relate more to the red head, the fixed mindset. So the growth mindset, you believe I can learn anything I want to. When I'm frustrated, I persevere. I want to challenge myself. When I fail, I learn. Tell me I try hard. If you succeed, I'm inspired. My effort and attitude determine everything. And if you have a fixed mindset, I'm either good at it or I'm not. When I'm frustrated, I give up. I don't like to be challenged. When I fail, I'm no good. Tell me I'm smart. If you succeed, I feel threatened, and my abilities determine everything. So let's see what people said. I'm not sure if these X's and checks are from the last question, Sarah, or do new?
Yeah, if you use one of the icons after you've answered Hollis's question, give it a minute, and then if you click on it again, you'll release it down, so it'll stay fresh.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so we have some people that have a growth mindset and some people that have a fixed mindset. That's normal and good, and we're going to learn more about how a growth mindset helps you with success. The scientist that has been focusing on research around the growth mindset is Carol Dweck out of Stanford University. And she studied a group of rising seventh graders of minority students in New York City. They started off at the same math level, and the control group received a 6-week study skills workshop before school started. And the intervention group received the same exact study skills workshop, but they also received a growth mindset workshop where they learned that you can improve brain connections and get smarter with effort. The results were astonishing. As you can see in this graph, the group of students who received the growth mindset training had rising math grades, and the students in the control group had failing math grades. So given this information, one way that you can help students develop a growth mindset in your classroom is to provide explicit instruction on it. You can teach them that hard work makes you smarter, that you can change your brain, and that with effort you can improve your performance. So when I teach this, I actually show students a picture of an MRI of a brain of a good reader while they're reading. Now, I work a lot with struggling readers, so that's why I chose these particular set of pictures. I explained that the left side of the brain is where the language area of the brain is, and so when one reads, that side becomes very activated because you're reading words and language. Then I show them this picture. And on the top picture is a person who struggles with reading and what their brain on the left side in the language area looks like. And you can see that it's not as active. However, the picture on the bottom shows the same struggling reader reading after a lot of hard work and practice. And you can see how the brain has changed and that the language area is now much more active and the student has become a better reader. This is really powerful for students to see, and it often motivates them tremendously. So one place that I did this was at a school where there was a group of 6th graders who were reading way below grade level. And we discovered that they were really struggling with the basic reading skills of phonics. Now, teaching basic reading skills is not something that a 6th grader normally wants to do. They think it's babyish, they are resistant to it. But after showing them these slides and talking about how they can change their brain, they were very motivated to become better readers and actually change their brain. So it can be very powerful. Another study that Dr. Dweck did was around how we praise students and how that can build a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. This study looked at a group of ethnically and economically diverse 5th graders. Both groups were given a moderately difficult set of problems from a nonverbal IQ test. One group was praised for effort. That's a really high score. You must have worked really hard at these problems, those types of praise. The other group was praised for performance and intelligence. So they were told things like, that's a really high score. You must be smart at these kinds of problems. To measure the students' reaction to setbacks and their resiliency, the students were given a very difficult set of questions next, and then it was followed up by a third set of questions that were comparable in difficulty to the first set. Here are the results. Students that were praised for intelligence, oh, you're really smart, you're really good at that, they became stuck in their concerns about their ability. They didn't want to try hard problems. They interpreted their failure on harder problems to mean that they lacked ability. They showed no interest in finishing the problems at home. They were ready to be done with it. They performed worse on the third set of problems. So just think of that. You start with a certain level of problem. They get challenged, and then they're given the same level that they started with, and they do worse. So we see a downgrade in their ability, in their performance right from the get-go. And they developed basically a fixed mindset that they had a certain level of intelligence, and that was it. On the other hand, students that were praised for effort chose to work on harder problems. They thought they could improve their performance with effort, They were like really excited to take the problems home with them to finish them. And they improved their performance on the third set of questions. Imagine that. The same group of types of kids, same age level, with just how they were praised, one group went down on their level and another group went up on their level. And they developed a growth mindset. So how can you integrate this part of the growth mindset into your curriculum? Well, by praising effort versus product, process versus product, or effort versus talent or intelligence. So here are some examples of praise that would promote a growth mindset. I like the way you persevered through that difficult word problem. I noticed how you went back into the text to find the answer that you were unsure about. That extra effort increased your brain's muscle. Wow, you easily answered all the problems on that page. I'm going to have to make the problems more challenging next time to help your brain get smarter. So now it's your turn to type in a process or effort praise. So think about your own class and what you teach and what kind of way that you could praise a student that would be on their process or their effort. So some of the ones that are coming in are, I noticed how hard you focused on completing that puzzle. I see how you're really focusing on your work and ignoring the distractions in the room. You worked really hard to try and think of so many words. Oops. You really worked hard. I love the way you translated the meaning of that prayer into your own words. Great insight, and they jump around, so I'm not getting to the end of your sentences. I apologize. I know this painting process was challenging, but you persevered and your painting is beautiful. I can tell you are tired. Oh, I can tell you tried your very best because, and then give them something very specific. We've learned from year ago, there was research years ago, and I'm sure many of you, or if not all of you, are familiar with it, which is that when you praise students, you need to be very specific. To just say, oh, that's really great, doesn't, first of all, students might not believe you, but when you get very specific, like, oh, I love the colors that you use in that painting because they really complement each other, not only does it make them believe you because you're giving them proof, but also it teaches them, why does that make a great painting? Why is my painting beautiful? Oh, it's beautiful because of the different colors that I use, and then it reinforces that skill. And now we're learning with this new research about how not only do you need to be specific, but you need to really praise their effort and their process. I like the way you worked hard to build your structure, even when it started falling apart. Great. So now we're going to move. So we've talked about grit, perseverance through short and long-term goals. We've talked about the growth mindset and how important it is to believe that, to understand that with effort, your brain can change and you can get smarter, and effort leads to excellence, basically. And now we're moving on to the next essential trait, which is motivation. So we're talking about Dr. Kathleen Cushman's work. She interviewed hundreds of students and she identified a motivation equation. Now, I'm sure as teachers, because I know myself as a teacher, it was very frustrating when I had a student who just didn't seem motivated. What do you do for that? I read a book about it. It still didn't seem to give me strategies that I could use. So now I'm giving you the secret to motivation, which is that there is an equation that the person has to value what it is that you're asking them to do, and they have to have an expectation of success in order to be motivated. Those of you who were not motivated to complete the riddle at the beginning of this webinar may not have had an expectation of success. So raise your hand if that was the case for you, where you just felt like, oh, this is too hard, I'm not even going to try. One person. Oh, two. Okay, so a few of you felt that way. I would agree. When I first saw those riddles, I felt the same way. So in order to now take that research information that she uncovered by interviewing all those students, how can that help us with that unmotivated student in our classroom? Well, the first thing is to check for lagging skills. This could identify an area where the student does not have an expectation of success. The way to do this is to look at the task the student is not motivated about. So if you've asked them to, let's say, read a book or write something or translate a prayer, and maybe they're just avoiding it, you can identify the sub-skills that are required to complete that task, and then figure out a way to check for mastery of those prerequisite skills. So I'm going to give you an example that I recently had. So I started working with a 5th grade student who was reading 2 years below grade level. So I started to look at, okay, what are the skills that you need to be reading at a 5th grade level? Well, in order to read at a 5th grade level, you need to be able to decode multi-syllable words. Obviously, you need to understand language and you need to understand the vocabulary and those types of things as well, but he seemed to have a good grasp on comprehension if things were read to him. So I know that in order to decode multisyllable words, you need to know and apply phonics rules. So I gave the student a quick nonsense word test. And lo and behold, he could not even get through the 2nd grade list of nonsense words. This is a 5th grade student who couldn't read 2nd grade nonsense words. Now, for those of you that aren't reading teachers, a nonsense word is a word that follows a particular phonics rule, but is not a real word. But the student has to follow that rule to read it as if it was a real word. Since many students memorize the visual configuration of words and common sight words, sometimes you can't tell that they never learned to decode phonetically unless you have them read nonsense words. So here was a student who was unmotivated by reading, who was weak in reading. I thought about what could the lagging skills be, what are the prerequisites to be reading at a 5th grade level. I tested that for mastery, and then I could provide him the kind of intervention he needed in order to relearn his phonics. So no wonder he wasn't motivated to read. He didn't have an expectation of success because he had never mastered the prerequisite skill. And I'm happy to report that after intervention, this student has improved his reading skills significantly and is much more motivated to read now. So that's an example of how you can check for lagging skills. On the same idea, part of the motivation equation, which is the idea of the expectation of success, you need to think about the zone of proximal development. So if you look at this graphic, there in the green section is an out of reach section. This is where a student would have no expectation of success, kind of like the riddles for many of you, and you would just give up. In the purple center is the area where a student could work independently. It's not much of a challenge. It's something they've already mastered. But what you want to do is try to find a way for them to be in the turquoise part, the zone of proximal development, where it's within their reach, but they might need some scaffolding in order to be produce and be successful. So if your current curriculum is out of the zone of proximal development for that student, they're not going to be motivated to do whatever it is you're asking them to do. So you might want to think about what kind of scaffolds can I put in place so that that student feels like they can have an expectation of success. If it has to do with writing and it's a student where there's something that's getting in the way of their writing, but they can show what they know by reading into a digital recorder, maybe that's a way of scaffolding it so that they can still participate in the curriculum, but they can bypass, that's their scaffold for making that particular piece in the zone of proximal development. So the other piece of the motivation equation has to do with finding value in what you're doing. Now, we know that a lot of tasks in school, kids, especially middle and high school kids, might not find it valuable. They have other things going on and they just think, why do I need to learn this? So one way to make it valuable to students is to connect it with their life, making it as real as possible so that they feel like it's valuable to them to participate because it's relating to their life. Another way is to connect it to their interests. So if you have a student who loves baseball, you can create word problems about baseball. You can, find books for them to read about baseball, and you can get the motivation by having the task be connected with what it is that they're interested in. And then the other piece is what their long-term goals are. So if you know that, one student wants to be an actress when she grows up, but she doesn't really want to do the reading or learn how to read or learn, literature, you can connect it with her long-term goal and say, well, I know that you want to be an actress, and in order to do that, you need to learn how to read because you're going to be reading scripts. So maybe then you provide her with scripts to read as a way to get in her, to become fluent in reading. So we've talked about the 3 different essential traits that have been proven by science to promote success and that are precursors to success. And you might have already made some connections between them because they all interconnect. If you have a growth mindset, you value effort toward reaching your goals, which motivates you to work hard. And your effort and focus leads to growth, which reinforces the growth mindset, and it continues on like that. So take a moment to type into the chat box an idea from this webinar that you feel you could incorporate into your teaching right away, or that you would want to incorporate right away. So one person says they're going to use more specific praise that mentions process, mentioning the girls that work hard, and that your brain can improve with hard work. Continue praising effort and look for specific details. Connect learning goals to the students' interests. Share with students that they can build their brain. Making subjects taught relatable, relational, and relevant to the students. More encouraging comments about the process that the students are actively working. Make a thoughtful effort to praise effort versus product. Use the language of grit and growth mindset in class. Individualized I can charts for struggling students. That's a nice idea. More emphasis needed on the value of the subjects to the students. Teaching students about the growth mindset. What is ZPD? I'm not sure what that is. Zone of Proximal Development, yes. Great, so it looks like you're armed with strategies that you can take into your classrooms tomorrow and do. incorporate how the brain works discussions, setting more specific and realistic goals. This is great. I'm so excited that you'll be able to take some of this information and start working with it right away.